All right, ladies and gentlemen, I believe after a beautiful start to the convention, we are now back with our next session. And once again, keep those tweets coming. Also, please keep your questions coming as well, because we're now about to dive into our next session. In fact, we have another very esteemed speaker joining us. He's none other than the president, NRAI, and also the founder and managing director of Indigo Hospitality Private Limited. In fact, as we all know, he's someone who is currently serving as the president of NRAI and has been actively involved in the larger industry advocacy issues since 2017. And he's someone who believes very firmly that India, with its vast and varied food repertoire, is a culinary powerhouse which has not achieved its true potential on the global stage, which is why he aspires to see India emerge as a global leader in culinary development, which in turn will inspire the next generation of chefs around the world. So on that note, it's time to get our insightful session started for all of you. And may I please invite Shri Anurag Katriar to please share his thoughts with all of us. In fact, Mr. Katriar will be joining us in just a couple of seconds. And while that happens, may I once again urge you all to please keep tweeting about the program so that you know all the conversations that you get to hear from our speakers. It'll be amazing to keep the conversations going using the hashtag FCIC2021. So with that, in just a couple of seconds, we'll have Mr. Anurag Katriar joining us. Stay with us and we'll get this beautiful session started for all of you. Let the insights flow in, let the appetizing inputs flow in for all of you on this bright morning. More welcome to you, sir, and over to you.
Thank you so very much. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And, before I start my address, I want to say a big thank you to the doctors and the medical fraternity at large in India who have been the biggest saviors. They have been demigods in this time of the pandemic. And I say this because one of the underlying themes of this conference is the pandemic and the resultant outbreak. So a big thank you to the doctors before we move on to, discussing our industry in general. Over last 1 year or so, we have been discussing the travails and troubles that have come because of the lockdown and the pandemic. We have gone ad nauseum. I mean, we have been talking about various advocacy efforts, what can be done. We have spoken enough about the mortality of restaurants, job losses, and whatnot. The advocacy efforts will continue. The changes that businesses need to bring in will continue. But I think today what I want to do is to talk for the way ahead. I want to talk about the future. How is this whole pandemic gonna impact the business of tomorrow? So to begin with, I think I'm very certain that the business parameters that existed before the pandemic and what is going to emerge post the pandemic whenever it gets over in its entirety will be two different things. Absolutely, you cannot compare the two. And I think it will be a huge fallacy if we compare the pre-pandemic times with the post-pandemic times, because nothing is going to remain same. It's a brand new world that we are going to wake up to, and that world is still emerging. We don't have a complete picture of how that world is going to be. So what is required right now for all of us in the industry is to be a little nimble, a little, ready to make those changes, accept the changes. Because unless we accept that there is a need to change, we will never make the change. So, what is going to change? One of the things that when we talk about business, I think one of the things in the public domain is that delivery is the new thing. I agree. If restaurants are shut, deliveries are doing, in terms of pure ratios, they're doing better than dine-in, because dine-in is zero. But let me clarify one thing by with every kind of I'm failing to find a word, but essentially I want to tell you that please do not think for a second that delivery can replace restaurants. It can never. Delivery on its own can continue to grow. It's a different vertical, but delivery can never be a substitute to a restaurant. And I say that because the business models for both are very, very different. While the restaurant has much higher capital, much higher fixed operating costs, and higher margins as well. Whereas when you work on delivery, the margins are lower, the costs are lower. So you cannot have a low margin product working on a higher fixed operating platform. So I think that is not going to happen. Uh, so what do we need to do? I think what we need to do is to remain aware of what is going on around us. Very, very clearly, a restaurant, which is an experiential thing, is not going to remain the same in times to come. And there are two big reasons for it. One is, of course, this fear of corona is in the air, the virus is still in the air. And other is also, there have been lots of job losses. There have been lots of what I call the incomes have gone down across the board in every sector, in every segment. And our industry thrives a lot on discretionary expenses. When incomes go down, discretionary expenses are bound to get impacted first. And we are not an exception. We are not an exception. So what do we need to do is to very clearly go asset light in the first place, and we also need to become a little low risk. When I say low risk, what I mean to say is, as restaurateurs, it's very, very important for us to bring down the proportion of our fixed operating expenses, or at least convert some of the fixed expenses to variable, so that we don't remain so susceptible to any kind of revenue fluctuations and we don't die. This is the new reality which we will need to accept. It is gonna be very different. Now coming to the delivery business, which is something which is being most talked about right now. I think there is nothing wrong with this business. It's a good business, but currently, if you see, most of the business that is happening in the delivery arena is happening through the aggregators. And very clearly, when you look at the aggregator-driven businesses, you will realize that your margins are very low between marketing and the commission for usage and of logistics and platform. I think you probably end up giving up upwards of 30% of your revenue to an aggregator. Now, this is not a model which can sustain you or grow you, unless you are also a believer in cash burn theory, but the enterprise value is going up. I personally am not. I personally believe that businesses are done to make money, and if they are not making money, there is something inherently wrong with them. So one of the things that we need to do now going forward is to look at how to bring back the digital control back in the hands of the restaurants. And by saying this, I don't mean to say that I'm talking about shunning the aggregators or anything. No, look at alternate sources of generating your delivery revenue, because that 30% that you are spending today will never make it very sustainable. Life is going to be very, very difficult going forward from a employment perspective as well. And that's perhaps the most painful part of this pandemic, because we are one of the largest employers of human capital in India. And when our sector suffers, the human suffering is many-fold higher than some other sectors. My personal belief is that we have already lost lots of jobs, and probably this is something which we cannot control, because अगर कारोबार नहीं होगा तो रोजगार नहीं हो सकता है, because दोनों का both the things are very interconnected to each other. So that is another thing. And moving forward, when I'm talking about saving cost, there is also a thing about bringing a little more emphasis on substance than style. We as restaurateurs, because we are in the business which is kind of a quote unquote show business. So we were spending a lot of money on style rather than concentrating solely on substance. I think now the time has come to look at more substance and less style, because in times like this, when things are not looking good, I think style is totally avoidable, because it is nothing but frivolous in times like this. You cannot be doing fancy shopping on credit cards. That's where we are today. We are all having troubles with our cash flow management. We are all having trouble with our resource generation. And it's absolutely prudent to cut down on anything frivolous, and style, by and large, does fall into that category. I think beyond that, what I want to tell people is that you have to keep a very positive outlook towards the business. See, as long as people continue to eat, I think this business has a chance to do well. We are right now perhaps one of the most badly impacted sector, but it doesn't mean that there is no light at the end of the tunnel. There is, and it's not very far away. I believe another couple of quarters, and I mean from Q3 we should be seeing some kind of a change coming our way. And I say that for a reason, because in next 6 months I think we will reach a certain degree of vaccination in the country, and I think caseloads would have come down significantly, and people will be raring to go out. But when we do that, I think we should be very careful about not crossing the line. Follow the guidelines issued by the domain experts, the government, because there is absolutely no way that you think you can get away by flouting those, because indiscretion by a few can hurt the entire sector very significantly. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to end my address by saying we have perhaps seen the worst of it. We are still going through a bad time, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Keep your positivity going. Have lots of trust in the aspect of hope. And last but not the least, keep looking at the changes around you and keep adapting yourself to those changes. Thank you so very much, everyone.